Good evening, good morning, good night, good afternoon, whatever time of day you are watching this. Thank you for tuning into the book club. We are on chapter 6 of Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa TerKeurst. And so I just want to do a quick review from chapters 1 through 5 before we go into chapter 6. So chapter 1, we learn that you are not crazy. Whatever it is that you're feeling, the anxiousness, the feeling that something is not right, you are not crazy. If you are feeling that something is not right in the relationships that you are in, then chances are something isn't right. And what I love about this, and I mentioned this before, what I love about the reading is that it goes so far beyond just what we would call intimate relationships. We're talking about setting healthy boundaries in every kind of relationship that we are a part of. And so in chapter 2, we learn about naming the tension that we've all been dealing with. And that is talking about access, how much access we give people around us, limiting the access. A lot of times, I know oh my goodness, I've been so guilty of this. We give people more access than they have shown that they have the responsibility to handle. And then in chapter 3 is not about the problems, is what the problems represent. Talked about dysfunction. And we're going to get a little bit more into dysfunction even in chapter 6. And then chapter 4, God takes boundary violations very seriously, and so should we. We saw from day 1 when he began creation, we saw from he put Adam and Eve in the garden, he set boundaries. Everything was put in its place. The stars were in its place. The water was in its place. It was told not to come beyond the sand. Then he told Adam and Eve, listen, you could eat from any tree in this garden except this one. He set a boundary, and then he set a violation. Sorry, he set a consequence should that violation be, should that boundary be violated. And the consequence was not to harm, but it was to protect. And then in chapter 5, you are already doing this well. And so setting boundaries might sound like such a hard and such a difficult thing to do. But the truth is, we set boundaries all the time. We hide passwords. We have keys. We don't just make an announcement and say, hey, neighbors, my key is right there under the chair or wherever. No, we set boundaries. We put things in its place and we protect what we feel is important to be protected. But for some reason, when it comes to our emotions, a lot of the times, setting those boundaries seem to get more difficult. And so in chapter 6 tonight, we're going to be talking about they may never see your boundaries as a good thing. They may never see your boundaries as a good thing. And so, right here, I just want to point back to something from chapter 3, talking about dysfunction. So, dysfunction, things aren't working correctly. Something gets in the way of how things ought to be. And that's on page 29. So dysfunction has to do with when abnormal becomes normal. Something is so wrong and it was initially maybe uncomfortable, but we've accepted it. We've taken it as, well, this is just the way things are. And then it becomes normal. So we are operating in dysfunction. And it's just like if the handle in the kitchen, that the kitchen sink breaks, and we take a pliers or something and we just start using the pliers. Yes, the pliers may work. Yes, it will look awkward, but what happened is that we took abnormal and started to make it as normal, even though all it takes is, to get another knob or another faucet set. But that's what dysfunction is. Things aren't working correctly. Something gets in the way of how things ought to be. And in chapter 3, she describes how things that are not normal, because they're accepted, they become normal. And so that's going to be important as we get into chapter 6. So here we go. In chapter 6, they may never see your boundaries as a good thing. So the first thing in chapter 6 that I would like to point out is she talked in the previous chapters about how she just prefers calm. She just prefers if, things are not bothered. And what she says here in chapter 6 is like calm is like, setting the thermostat to keep the room cool, but you leave the windows and doors open. And then you stand at the windows and the doors and ask the heat to not come inside, right? It sounds just ridiculous. And that is what it is when we just want calm. That's just not realistic. We live in a real world and we have real issues to deal with, all right? And so we have to, in setting boundaries, we have to accept the fact that it's not going to be all calm. There's going to be some friction, some trouble, some tension along the way. And so not just the heat coming inside, but that constant heat, like she describes, can be damaging. If you were to take a house in the Bahamas or in any climate that is usually hot and you keep that closed up, even if the weather shifts into cold weather and that house just stays closed up all the time, when you get in there, what's going to happen? We're going to have mold and mildew and all sorts of crazy things, paint peeling, wallpaper peeling, tiles maybe popping up off the floor, right? And so that is the same way when we try to avoid the tension and the trouble that could come from setting boundaries, right? And one of the lies that sometimes we believe is that I'm making too big a deal of this. And so we feel the problem, we know that something isn't right, and then we start to doubt our feelings and we start to doubt ourselves. And we're going to see later in chapter 6 how even the Bible talks about that and how we should be actually aware of our feelings and what's triggering us. So right here, talking about becoming comfortable with the dysfunction. If you have the book, we are on page 85, where we fall into passivity. That doesn't work. Wishful thinking, that doesn't work. Until we realize that we just have to address the issue, right? And as we heal and as we grow, we realize more and more that there are going to be people who are just going to be left behind. Those are not her words, those are mine. I realize that the more that I grow, and this is in any area of your life, once you make a decision that you want to be better in any particular thing, somebody, some situation, something in your life is going to get left behind, because the truth of the matter is everybody is not prepared to go through the emotional growth and the emotional healing to go on that same journey with you. It doesn't make me or you better than them, but it does mean that relationship, the temperatures of relationships, the way that we operate in some relationships may have to change in order for us to continue to grow, right? And so on page 86 and 87, on pages 86 and 87, she says, if this is you talking about, you want to heal, you want to grow, and you see that it's causing tension in relationships, she says, if this is you, don't be surprised by the tension caused by relational strain. And when you decide to establish boundaries and the other person tries to label you as controlling, difficult, or uncooperative, see it as a compliment. That means you're doing something right. Okay? So that's going to come. So basically, she's warning you, listen, when you start setting these boundaries, this is what's going to happen. All right? So the tension exists. We're on page 86. The tension exists because you are doing the difficult work of no longer cooperating with dysfunction. That gave me grace for myself, because so many times, like, people are seen as though, oh, you think you're better than, or you're trying to, do this or do that. And the truth of the matter is all you're trying to do is be a healthier, a better, a whole you, and to live in the purpose that God has called you to. And so when those comments and those things start to come at you, take it as a compliment. I like to say it like this: take it as insight, not insult. So she says here, what her counselor said to her, what people don't work out, they act out. And she goes on, their unwillingness to address the issues driving their behavior is their choice. You cannot force people to do what they are not willing to do. You don't need to fight it, agree with it, and accept it. Grieve someone's refusal to keep growing, but don't beg them to see your boundaries as a good thing. They may never see your boundaries as a good thing. And I can honestly say, I have wasted so much time trying to pull people along. And it doesn't mean that I'm better than anyone, but there were things that I could see and they just weren't ready for it. And God had to show me, listen, it's for you, not them. And I want to go back to the previous page of something that her friend said to her. It's right here in blue. Says, your healing will bring out the emotional immaturity of those around you, not willing to pursue help for themselves. The day that you decide that the trauma that you went through as a child, that thing, that comment someone made to you in high school that has bothered you for all of your life, whatever it is, the day that you decide that you're going to work on that, the day that you decide, I don't want to keep getting angry and reacting this way to situations and to people. Like I said earlier, somebody, something, some situation is going to get left behind. But it's not for us to try to pull them along. It's our journey. We just have to set the boundaries. And as we set those boundaries, like chapter 6 is saying, they may not always see your boundaries as a good thing. So here are some examples of how someone who finds difficulty accepting your boundary may show up. Because now you setting boundaries show them up. It shows them that there are some things that they need to go and work on. And everybody, like we said, they're just not there yet. So examples of how this might show up, like she says, they might start gambling instead of holding down a regular job, porn, sex outside of marriage, slandering people who intimidate them. Like I've seen that a lot. So instead of stepping up to the plate and saying, okay, you know what, if they could do it, I could do it. We have to try to find a reason why they are doing it, or say that they're cheating at it or something like that. Trying to one up others' achievements to prove how great they are. So someone did this. Now it becomes a competition in their mind. And we're going to talk about that false reality as well. So it becomes a competition in their mind, and they're trying to now get a one up on this person who is setting this boundary, right? Spending money they don't have, shaming and blaming you, substance abuse, saying mean and cruel things to or about you, using manipulative tactics to stay in control of you. And I saw a quote the other day that says, when someone can't get control of you, they will try to control the way other people see you. And so we have to be ready for all of this, because once you start setting boundaries and you say, I can't go out every weekend, or, I'm not going to be able to be, with you for hours and hours on end, or whatever the it is. We all have our different situations. It's going to come. The tension is going to come. So the real risk, here's the real risk, is the longer you stay in this tension, the possibility increases that you'll get pulled down. And she uses an example of a game that people used to play where, or I don't know, people still play it. Someone is standing up on top of a table and the other person is down low. And the goal is to see who can pull who. And for almost every time, the person who's on top of the table gets pulled down, because for some reason, it's just easier for it to happen that way. And so when you try to beg and when you try to get them to understand and believe that, listen, this is why I need these boundaries, you're going to get pulled down, because you have to elevate yourself to a higher, a healthier place mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it is that you're dealing with, so that you can better help yourself and better help the people around you. Okay. And in right in pink on page 87, when you attempt to have honest conversations about the issues at hand with loving care as the motivation, and you are rejected or attacked in return, the relationship will need to change. The mature person has a choice to sink down or rise above and stand firm in their health. And then she also talks about, she uses some information from the American Psychological Association, where when we are not ready to deal with the broken places inside of us, we revert to the age where the trauma happened. I thought that was really amazing, because the first thing I thought of was places where, and in times where I used to react a certain way to certain things, and even in places where I still need to grow, right? And so she says, when you see that happening, that's usually where the age where that trauma happened. And so, well, not she, but the American Psychological Association, based on the quote that she used in her book. And so, once again, this is our journey. We cannot pull them along. We cannot make them see what we think they need to see, but we could help ourselves and rise above it and grow, right? Now, here is the big whammy that keeps some of us stuck. So we get these glimpses every now and then of a good moment, right? Oh, we had a good conversation. We made a good connection. And we see these little glimpses here and there. Here is what she has to say about it. And I'd just like to read it. She says, what you see in glimpses should be what you see the majority of the time. If you are hanging on by glimpses, you're hanging off of air, is basically what she's saying. If you find yourself so grateful for the smallest common courtesy, you're hanging your hope on nothing but air. I had posted in the Facebook group, the book club, that I have been guilty of rushing back in too soon. So you had a conversation, it was a good conversation, and now you want to just pour your heart back into this person and back into everything. Hold up. No. And we have a really, really, really good example of that in First Samuel chapter 18, where we start to see this tension between Saul and David, where Saul becomes angry because the people were singing, the women were singing, Saul is slain his thousands and David is 10,000. And my boys and I are now reading First Samuel, and I'm ahead of them, and I've been really studying Saul. And what amazed me with that was that it wasn't that Saul was winning that bothered him. It was what the people were saying about it that bothered him. And then if you know the story, King Saul tries to kill David. David runs. David has an opportunity to kill him. David cuts the part off his coat, and he says, Saul starts weeping, oh, you're a better man than me, so on and so forth. And then he says, come back. David doesn't go back. He stays where he was in the wilderness with his men in the caves and whatever they were doing. And he has a second opportunity. Saul comes back again, looking for David and his man to kill him. David has another opportunity to kill him. David instead grabs Saul's sword and his helmet that was right on the side of his head, and he runs. He says to Saul again, look, I could have killed you. Saul does the same thing again. Oh, you're a better man than me. Oh, I've sinned and all of that. But David had sense enough to know, don't go back there because he's going to kill you. Okay? And sometimes we get so caught up in the small moments or these glimpses like she describes it. And then we miss out on what a real, true, healthy, whole relationship can look like, because we're hanging on these little bits and pieces that either one day is just going to implode, or we're going to internalize it. And like we see in chapter 5, it even turns out in us being sick. All right. So Here it is. If you feel you have to trade the best of who you are to protect the worst of who they are, do not ignore that red flag. It's a red flag. Oh, this part right here. If your friends think you are accepting too little, it's a red flag. If you are afraid to talk about any of this with your wise friends, that's not just a red flag, it's a full-on fire. And so that's when you're in a relationship with someone, and we're talking about any kind of relationship. And there are things that we know we need to talk about. Or here's a big one. I've done it before. You with that special someone, and you afraid to talk to that auntie or that sister or that cousin or that friend who you know gonna tell you the full-on truth about this situation, and say, girl, you know you're making no sense. Or you talking to the fellas, and the fellas are like, boy, leave that one alone. It might be him in vernacular. And so we avoid talking with those people, because we know that those people are probably going to say something that we don't necessarily want to hear. She says that's not just a red flag, it's a full-on fire. So here are just a few points. It's quite a bit here in page 89, but just a few of them. When we realize that we're dealing with someone who has emotional immaturity, they resist needed conversations or turn them against you, right? When you bring up things that need to be addressed, their denial of the issues at hand surrounding the facts leave you feeling like the crazy one. They go back to unhealthy coping mechanisms. They lack self-awareness. They have an out of proportion reaction to a conversation or the situation at hand. Here's another one. They lack empathy, right? They tend not to own any parts of the conflict. So in other words, they ain't never wrong, right? They are unwilling to honor or respect any communicated boundaries. They do not take responsibility for themselves. They refuse to acknowledge how unhealed trauma from their past, possibly even their childhood, needs to be worked out. That one there is heavy, because the truth of the matter is, if we all just take a look at ourselves and write it down on the things that we know off the top that we need to work on, and we say, where did this come from? Where did this problem start? We're going to have to dig up some things that's really going to turn us inside out and really bring up some ugly things. It could be choices that we've made. It could be things that we didn't even have a choice in, things that were just passed on to us, situations that we were thrust into and we just had no control over. But the reality is, if we're going to heal, we got to go back to those places. And of course, this comes with prayer. This comes with seeking out wise advice and help, and allowing ourselves to be healed. They rewrite history to prove a point that serves only them or their version of the truth. I have seen this in my life growing up so many times. I've seen this even as an adult. People rewrite history. And while you and I are looking at it like, that ain't what happened, they have so rehearsed that till it becomes the truth. So you either walk away thinking, oh, maybe I misunderstood it, or you walk away feeling crazy, or you walk away feeling even more angry than when you started, right? Their version of the truth is what protects them, and they really can't discern what is and is not deception. So there, she just explained it. So instead of acknowledging or confronting wrong, I think that word is there, they sweep it under the rug and hope that they're not caught. So here is the reality. As we go through that list, there are things that apply to me. There are things that may apply to you. But the fact that we are self-aware enough to realize that these are some things we need to work on shows that we're on a track to emotional maturity. We are talking in this about people who are just not on that journey at all. They are not ready to accept any wrongdoing. They're just not there. We have to set the boundaries, and we have to accept the fact that they may not see it as a good thing. So in wrapping up, we're going to look at this scripture in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. And so it continues, the verse says, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So, talking about being sober-minded and being alert. Here she says, God has a part and we have a part. So we have a responsibility to stay clear-headed and pay attention to what is affecting and triggering our emotions. And then the part on God is that he says that we must cast all our cares upon him because he cares for us. So we give our cares and concerns to him, but we have to be mindful, sober-minded, and watchful. And in the book on page 92 and 93, she gives even the Greek words for watchful and sober-minded. And it literally means to be alert, awake, to be watchful, self-possessed, clear-headed, and attentive to what is going on. And so when we feel these things, it's not for us to ignore and not for us to say, oh, I just, no, your body, your mind. We learned in chapter 5 that the body's limbic system is actually telling you something. It's actually warning you. It's your inbuilt safety, security system for your emotions, for your feelings. Do not ignore it. And so it's saying to be watchful. Watch when you are in certain conversations, when you are with certain people. Or do you have to be on edge? It is not healthy. All right. So when one person dabbles in unhealthy habits, refuses to look at themselves through the lens of reality, or stops considering the feelings of others, there will be an increasing tension until you sink to where they are or they rise to where you are. Only you can decide how to either manage that tension or say enough is enough and make changes. My hope is that we can make healthy changes instead of letting things get to a point where the only choice we have is to end the relationship. And that is the thing about boundaries. The goal is not to just get rid of people, get rid of relationships, cut people off. That's not the goal. The goal is to create healthier relationships where you are not holding on to the tension, you are not holding on to the pain or sucking up on all of the hurt and pain just to keep the peace. Like people say, just to keep. No, that is not right, because what you're doing is hurting yourself. You are not allowing yourself to grow into the purpose, into the fullness of who God has created you to be. So one more thing, at the end of the book that she says, this is from her a therapist, says when people don't work out, they act out. When someone has internal chaos from what hasn't been worked out internally, they will often stir up external chaos and point the finger of blame. Blame is an attempt to medicate unhealed pain. So when you try to establish boundaries to protect yourself from the chaos, they'll see this as an extremely offensive move and will try to manipulate you into feeling guilty so you drop your boundary. And it has a lot to do with control. And he said it right even there. A manipulative person has never met a boundary that they liked. Chances are the manipulator has unhealed trauma or childhood wounds from the past that make them resistant to any perceived control over them. All right. So our prayer for this, for the end of chapter 6 says, Father, this journey to health and wholeness isn't hopeless. Help me stay sober-minded and alert as I choose to stop participating in unhealthy behaviors and dysfunctional relationship patterns. I am asking for your help. I know boundaries are not easy, but help me make healthy changes. As I draw necessary boundaries, please help me process any disappointment I'm simultaneously feeling. I believe you have good things in store for me. In Jesus' name, amen. And I believe that, I claim that for myself and for everyone who is watching and who will watch this, that we are going to grow and we are going to live in the fullness of who God has called us to be. And if setting healthy boundaries is a part of that and will help us to get there, then we are going to do it, and we're going to do it well. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in chapter 7.